Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino is a postmodern novel framed as a conversation between the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan and Marco Polo. The book consists of brief prose poems describing 55 fictitious cities that are narrated by Polo. I only narrated chapters 1 to 3. There are 9 chapters in the book, but I just wasn't feeling like narrating the whole thing at this time. So if you would like to hear the whole novel, please let me know. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the recording, and join my YouTube as a member, and I will try to give priority to your requests. Now enjoy Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Chapter 1. Kublai Khan does not necessarily believe everything Marco Polo says when he describes the cities visited on his expeditions, but the Emperor of the Tartars does continue listening to the young Venetian with greater attention and curiosity than he shows any other messenger or explorer of his. In the lives of emperors, there is a moment which follows pride in the boundless extension of the territories we have conquered, and the melancholy and relief of knowing we shall soon give up any thought of knowing and understanding them. There is a sense of emptiness that comes over us at evening, with the odor of the elephants after the rain and the sandalwood ashes growing cold in the braziers, a dizziness that makes rivers and mountains tremble on the fallow curves of the planispheres where they are portrayed, and rolls up, one after the other, the dispatches announcing to us the collapse of the last enemy troops, from defeat to defeat, and flakes the wax of the seals of obscure kings who beseech our army's protection, offering in exchange annual tributes of precious metals, tanned hides, and tortoiseshell. It is the desperate moment when we discover that this empire, which had seemed to us the sum of all wonders, is an endless, formless ruin, that corruption's gangrene has spread too far to be healed by our scepter, that the triumph over enemy sovereigns has made us the heirs of their long undoing. Only in Marco Polo's accounts was Kublai Khan able to discern, through the walls and towers destined to crumble, the tracery of a pattern so subtle it could escape the termites' gnawing. Cities and Memory 1. Leaving there and proceeding for 3 days toward the east, you reach Diomira, a city with 60 silver domes, bronze statues of all the gods, streets paved with lead, a crystal theater, a golden cock that crows each morning on a tower. All these beauties will already be familiar to the visitor who has seen them also in other cities. But the special quality of this city for the man who arrives there on a September evening, when the days are growing shorter and the multicolored lamps are lighted all at once at the doors of the food stalls, and from a terrace a woman's voice cries, "Ooh," is that he feels envy toward those who now believe they have once before lived an evening identical to this, and who think they were happy that time. Cities in Memory 2. When a man rides a long time through wild regions, he feels the desire for a city. Finally, he comes to Isidora, a city where the buildings have spiral staircases encrusted with spiral seashells, where perfect telescopes and violins are made, where the foreigner hesitating between 2 women always encounters a third, where cockfights degenerate into bloody brawls among the betters. He was thinking of all these things when he desired a city. Isidora, therefore, is the city of his dreams, with one difference. The dreamed-of city contained him as a young man. He arrives at Isidora in his old age. In the square, there is the wall where the old men sit and watch the young go by. He is seated in a row with them. Desires are already memories. Cities and Desire 1. There are 2 ways of describing the city of Dorothea. You can say that 4 aluminum towers rise from its walls, flanking 7 gates with spring-operated drawbridges that span the moat, whose water feeds 4 green canals, which cross the city, dividing it into 9 quarters, each with 300 houses and 700 chimneys, and bearing in mind that the nubile girls of each quarter marry youths of other quarters, and their parents exchange the goods that each family holds in monopoly: bergamot, sturgeon roe, astrolabes, amethysts. You can then work from these facts until you learn everything you wish about the city in the past, present, and future. Or else you can say, like the camel driver who took me there, I arrived here in my first youth. One morning, many people were hurrying along the streets toward the market. The women had fine teeth and looked you straight in the eye. 3 soldiers on a platform played the trumpet, and all around wheels turned and colored banners fluttered in the wind. Before then, I had known only the desert and the caravan routes. In the years that followed, my eyes returned to contemplate the desert expanses and the caravan routes. But now I know this path is only one of the many that opened before me on that morning in Dorothea. Cities in Memory 3. In vain, great-hearted Kublai, shall I attempt to describe Zara. City of high bastions. I could tell you how many steps make up the streets rising like stairways, and the degree of the arcade's curves, and what kind of zinc scales cover the roofs. But I already know this would be the same as telling you nothing. The city does not consist of this, but of relationships between the measurements of its space and the events of its past. The height of a lamppost and the distance from the ground of a hanged usurper's swaying feet. The line strung from the lamppost to the railing opposite, and the festoons that decorate the course of the Queen's nuptial procession. The height of that railing and the leap of the adulterer who climbed over it at dawn. The tilt of a guttering and a cat's progress along it as he slips into the same window. The firing range of a gunboat which has suddenly appeared beyond the cape, and the bomb that destroys the guttering. The rips in the fish net, and the three old men seated on the dock mending nets and telling each other for the 100th time the story of the gunboat of the usurper, who some say was the Queen's illegitimate son, abandoned in his swaddling clothes there on the dock. As this wave from memories flows in, the city soaks it up like a sponge and expands. A description of Zara, as it is today, should contain all Zara's past. The city, however, does not tell its past, but contains it like the lines of a hand, written in the corners of the streets, the gratings of the windows, the banisters of the steps, the antennae of the lightning rods, the poles of the flags, every segment marked in turn with scratches, indentations, scrolls. Cities and Desire, 2. At the end of 3 days, moving southward, you come upon Anastasia, a city with concentric canals, watering it, and kites flying over it. I should now list the wares that can profitably be brought here: agate, onyx, chrysoprase, and other varieties of chalcedony. I should praise the flesh of the golden pheasant, cooked here over fires of seasoned cherry wood and sprinkled with much sweet marjoram, and tell of the women I have seen bathing in the pool of a garden, and who sometimes, it is said, invite the stranger to disrobe with them and chase them in the water. But with all this, I would not be telling you the city's true essence, for while the description of Anastasia awakens desires one at a time, only to force you to stifle them, when you are in the heart of Anastasia one morning, your desires waken all at once and surround you. The city appears to you as a whole, where no desire is lost, and of which you are a part. And since it enjoys everything you do not enjoy, you can do nothing but inhabit this desire and be content. Such is the power, sometimes called malignant, sometimes benign, that Anastasia, the treacherous city, possesses. If for 8 hours a day you work as a cutter of agate, onyx, chrysoprase, your labor, which gives form to desire, takes from desire its form, and you believe you are enjoying Anastasia wholly, when you are only its slave. Cities and Signs, 1. You walk for days among trees and among stones. Rarely does the eye light on a thing, and then only when it has recognized that thing as the sign of another thing. A print in the sand indicates the tiger's passage. A marsh announces a vein of water, the hibiscus flower, the end of winter. All the rest is silent and interchangeable. Trees and stones are only what they are. Finally, the journey leads to the city of Tamara. You penetrate it along streets thick with signboards jutting from the walls. The eye does not see things, but images of things that mean other things. Pincers point out the tooth drawer's house, a tankard, the tavern, halberds, the barracks, scales, the grocer's. Statues and shields depict lions, dolphins, towers, stars, a sign that something, who knows what, has as its sign a lion or a dolphin or a tower or a star. Other signals warn of what is forbidden in a given place: to enter the alley with wagons, to urinate behind the kiosk, to fish with your pole from the bridge. And one is allowed: watering zebras, playing bowls, burning relatives' corpses. From the doors of the temples, the god statues are seen, each portrayed with his attributes: the cornucopia, the hourglass, the Medusa, so that the worshipper can recognize them and address his prayers correctly. If a building has no signboard or figure, its very form and the position it occupies in the city's order suffice to indicate its function: the palace, the prison, the mint, the Pythagorean school, the brothel. The wares, too, which the vendors display on their stalls, are valuable not in themselves, but as signs of other things. The embroidered headband stands for elegance, the gilded palanquin, power, the volumes of Averroes, learning, the ankle bracelet, voluptuousness. Your gaze scans the streets as if they were written pages. The city says everything you must think, makes you repeat her discourse. And while you believe you are visiting Tamara, you are only recording the names with which she defines herself and all her parts. However the city may really be, beneath this thick coating of signs, whatever it may contain or conceal, you leave Tamara without having discovered it. Outside, the land stretches, empty, to the horizon. The sky opens with speeding clouds, in the shape that chance and wind give the clouds, you are already intent on recognizing figures, a sailing ship, a hand, an elephant. Cities in memory. 4. Beyond 6 rivers and 3 mountain ranges rises Zora, a city that no one, having seen it, can forget, but not because, like other memorable cities, it leaves an unusual image in your recollections. Zora has the quality of remaining in your memory point by point, in its succession of streets, of houses along the streets, and of doors and windows in the houses, though nothing in them possesses a special beauty or rarity. Zora's secret lies in the way your gaze runs over patterns following one another, as in a musical score, where not a note can be altered or displaced. The man who knows by heart how Zora is made, if he is unable to sleep at night, can imagine he is walking along the streets, and he remembers the order by which the copper clock follows the barber's striped awning, then the fountain with the 9 jets, the astronomer's glass tower, the melon vendor's kiosk, the statue of the hermit and the lion, the Turkish bath, the cafe at the corner, the alley that leads to the harbor. This city, which cannot be expunged from the mind, is like an armature, a honeycomb, in whose cells each of us can place the things he wants to remember, names of famous men, virtues, numbers, vegetable and mineral classifications, dates of battles, constellations, parts of speech. Between each idea and each point of the itinerary, an affinity or contrast can be established, serving as an immediate aid to memory. So the world's most learned men are those who have memorized Zora. But in vain I set out to visit the city, forced to remain motionless and always the same, in order to be more easily remembered. Zora has languished, disintegrated, disappeared. The earth has forgotten her. Cities and desire. 3. Despina can be reached in 2 ways, by ship or by camel. The city displays one face to the traveler arriving over land, and a different one to him who arrives by sea. When the camel driver sees, at the horizon of the tableland, the pinnacles of the skyscrapers come into view, the radar antennae, the white and red windsocks flapping, the chimneys belching smoke, he thinks of a ship. He knows it is a city, but he thinks of it as a vessel that will take him away from the desert, a windjammer about to cast off, with the breeze already swelling the sails, not yet unfurled, or a steamboat with its boiler vibrating in the iron keel, and he thinks of all the ports, the foreign merchandise, the cranes unload on the docks, the taverns where crews of different flags break bottles over one another's heads, the lighted ground floor windows, each with a woman combing her hair. In the coastline's haze, the sailor discerns the form of a camel's withers, an embroidered saddle with glittering fringe between 2 spotted humps, advancing and swaying. He knows it is a city, but he thinks of it as a camel, from whose pack hang wineskins and bags of candied fruit, date wine, tobacco leaves, and already he sees himself at the head of a long caravan taking him away from the desert of the sea, toward oases of fresh water in the palm trees' jagged shade, toward palaces of thick, whitewashed walls, tiled courts where girls are dancing barefoot, moving their arms, half hidden by their veils, and half revealed. Each city receives its form from the desert it opposes, and so the camel driver and the sailor see Despina, a border city between 2 deserts. Cities and signs. 2. Travelers return from the city of Zirma with distinct memories, a blind black man shouting in the crowd, a lunatic teetering on a skyscraper's cornice, a girl walking with a puma on a leash. Actually, many of the blind men who tap their canes on Zirma's cobblestones are black. In every skyscraper, there is someone going mad. All lunatics spend hours on cornices. There is no puma that some girl does not raise, as a whim. The city is redundant. It repeats itself so that something will stick in the mind. I too am returning from Zirma. My memory includes dirigibles flying in all directions, at window level, streets of shops where tattoos are drawn on sailors' skin, underground trains, crammed with obese women suffering from the humidity. My traveling companions, on the other hand, swear they saw only one dirigible hovering among the city's spires, only one tattoo artist arranging needles and inks and pierced patterns on his bench, only one fat woman fanning herself on a train's platform. Memory is redundant. It repeats signs so that the city can begin to exist. Thin cities. 1. Isaura, city of the 1,000 wells, is said to rise over a deep subterranean lake. On all sides, wherever the inhabitants dig long vertical holes in the ground, they succeed in drawing up water, as far as the city extends, and no farther. Its green border repeats the dark outline of the buried lake. An invisible landscape conditions the visible one. Everything that moves in the sunlight is driven by the lapping wave enclosed beneath the rock's calcareous sky. Consequently, 2 forms of religion exist in Isaura. The city's gods, according to some people, live in the depths, in the black lake that feeds the underground streams. According to others, the gods live in the buckets that rise, suspended from a cable, as they appear over the edge of the wells, in the revolving pulleys, in the windlasses of the norias, in the pump handles, in the blades of the windmills that draw the water up from the drillings, in the trestles that support the twisting probes, in the reservoirs perched on stilts over the roofs, in the slender arches of the aqueducts, in all the columns of water, the vertical pipes, the plungers, the drains, all the way up to the weathercocks that surmount the airy scaffoldings of Isaura, a city that moves entirely upward. Sent off to inspect the remote provinces, the Great Khan's envoys and tax collectors duly returned to Kai Ping Fu and to the gardens of magnolias in whose shade Kublai strolled, listening to their long reports. The ambassadors were Persians, Armenians, Syrians, Copts, Turkomans. The emperor is he who is a foreigner to each of his subjects, and only through foreign eyes and ears could the empire manifest its existence to Kublai, in languages incomprehensible to the Khan. The envoys related information heard in languages incomprehensible to them. From this opaque, dense striator emerged the revenues received by the imperial treasury, the first and last names of officials dismissed and decapitated, the dimensions of the canals that the narrow rivers fed in times of drought. When the young Venetian made his report, a different communication was established between him and the emperor. Newly arrived and totally ignorant of the Levantine languages, Marco Polo could express himself only with gestures, leaps, cries of wonder and of horror, animal barkings or hootings, or with objects he took from his knapsacks, ostrich plumes, pea shooters, quartzes, which he arranged in front of him like chessmen, returning from the missions on which Kublai sent him. The ingenious foreigner improvised pantomimes that the sovereign had to interpret. One city was depicted by the leap of a fish escaping the cormorant's beak to fall into a net, another city by a naked man running through fire unscorched, a third by a skull, its teeth green with mold, clenching a round, white pearl. The Great Khan deciphered the signs, but the connection between them and the places visited remained uncertain. He never knew whether Marco wished to enact an adventure that had befallen him on his journey, an exploit of the city's founder, the prophecy of an astrologer, a rebus or a charade to indicate a name. But, obscure or obvious as it might be, everything Marco displayed had the power of emblems, which, once seen, cannot be forgotten or confused. In the Khan's mind, the empire was reflected in a desert of labile and interchangeable data, like grains of sand, from which there appeared, for each city and province, the figures evoked by the Venetians' logogryphs. As the seasons passed and his missions continued, Marco mastered the Tartar language and the national idioms and tribal dialects. Now his accounts were the most precise and detailed that the Great Khan could wish, and there was no question or curiosity which they did not satisfy. Yet each piece of information about a place recalled to the emperor's mind that first gesture or object with which Marco had designated the place. The new fact received a meaning from that emblem and also added to the emblem a new meaning. Perhaps, Kublai thought, the empire is nothing but a zodiac of the mind's phantasms. On the day when I know all the emblems, he asked Marco, shall I be able to possess my empire at last? And the Venetian answered, Sire, do not believe it. On that day you will be an emblem among emblems. Chapter 2. The other ambassadors warned me of famines, extortions, conspiracies, or else they informed me of newly discovered turquoise mines, advantageous prices in marten furs, suggestions for supplying damascened blades. And you, the Great Khan asked Polo, you return from lands equally distant, and you can tell me only the thoughts that come to a man who sits on his doorstep at evening to enjoy the cool air. What is the use, then, of all your traveling? It is evening. We are seated on the steps of your palace. There is a slight breeze, Marco Polo answered. Whatever country my words may evoke around you, you will see it from such a vantage point. Even if instead of the palace there is a village on pilings, and the breeze carries the stench of a muddy estuary. My gaze is that of a man meditating, lost in thought. I admit it. But yours? You cross archipelagos, tundras, mountain ranges. You would do as well, never moving from here. The Venetian knew that when Kublai became vexed with him, the emperor wanted to follow more clearly a private train of thought. So Marco's answers and objections took their place in a discourse already proceeding on its own in the Great Khan's head. That is to say, between the two of them, it did not matter whether questions and solutions were uttered aloud, or whether each of the two went on pondering in silence. In fact, they were silent, their eyes half closed, reclining on cushions, swaying in hammocks, smoking long amber pipes. Marco Polo imagined answering, or Kublai Khan imagined his answer, that the more one was lost in unfamiliar quarters of distant cities, the more one understood the other cities he had crossed to arrive there, and he retraced the stages of his journeys, and he came to know the port from which he had set sail, and the familiar places of his youth, and the surroundings of home, and a little square of Venice, where he gambled as a child. At this point, Kublai Khan interrupted him, or imagined interrupting him, or Marco Polo imagined himself interrupted, with a question such as, "You advance always with your head turned back?" Or, "Is what you see always behind you?" Or rather, "Does your journey take place only in the past?" All this so that Marco Polo could explain or imagine explaining, or be imagined explaining, or succeed finally in explaining to himself that what he sought was always something lying ahead, and even if it was a matter of the past, it was a past that changed gradually as he advanced on his journey, because the traveler's past changes according to the route he has followed, not the immediate past, that is, to which each day that goes by adds a day, but the more remote past, arriving at each new city, the traveler finds again a past of his that he did not know he had. The foreignness of what you no longer are or no longer possess lies in wait for you in foreign, impossessed places. Marco enters a city. He sees someone in a square living a life for an instant that could be his. He could now be in that man's place. If he had stopped in time long ago, or if, long ago, at a crossroads, instead of taking one road, he had taken the opposite one, and after long wandering, he had come to be in the place of that man in that square. By now, from that real or hypothetical past of his, he is excluded. He cannot stop. He must go on to another city, where another of his pasts awaits him, or something perhaps that had been a possible future of his and is now someone else's present. Futures not achieved are only branches of the past, dead branches. Journeys to relive your past was the Khan's question at this point, a question which could also have been formulated, journeys to recover your future? And DeMarco's answer was, elsewhere is a negative mirror. The traveler recognizes the little that is his, discovering the much he has not had and will never have. Cities in Memory, 5. In Maurilia, the traveler is invited to visit the city and, at the same time, to examine some old postcards that show it as it used to be. The same identical square with a hen in the place of the bus station, a bandstand in the place of the overpass, two young ladies with white parasols in the place of the munitions factory. If the traveler does not wish to disappoint the inhabitants, he must praise the postcard city and refer it to the present one, though he must be careful to contain his regret at the changes within definite limits, admitting that the magnificence and prosperity of the metropolis Morelia, when compared to the old provincial Morelia, cannot compensate for a certain lost grace, which, however, can be appreciated only now in the old postcards, whereas before, when that provincial Morelia was before one's eyes, one saw absolutely nothing graceful, and would see it even less today, if Morelia had remained unchanged. And in any case, the metropolis has the added attraction that, through what it has become, one can look back with nostalgia at what it was. Beware of saying to them that sometimes different cities follow one another on the same site and under the same name, born and dying without knowing one another, without communication among themselves. At times, even the names of the inhabitants remain the same, and their voices' accent, and also the features of the faces. But the gods who live beneath names and above places have gone off without a word, and outsiders have settled in their place. It is pointless to ask whether the new ones are better or worse than the old, since there is no connection between them, just as the old postcards do not depict Morelia as it was, but a different city which, by chance, was called Morelia, like this one. In the center of Fedora, that gray stone metropolis, stands a metal building with a crystal globe in every room. Looking into each globe, you see a blue city, the model of a different Fedora. There are the forms the city could have taken if, for one reason or another, it had not become what we see today. In every age, someone, looking at Fedora as it was, imagined a way of making it the ideal city. But while he constructed his miniature model, Fedora was already no longer the same as before, and what had been until yesterday a possible future became only a toy in a glass globe. The building with the globes is now Fedora's museum. Every inhabitant visits it, chooses the city that corresponds to his desires, contemplates it, imagining his reflection in the Medusa pond that would have collected the waters of the canal, if it had not been dried up. The view from the high canopied box along the avenue reserved for elephants, now banished from the city. The fun of sliding down the spiral, twisting minaret, which never found a pedestal from which to rise. On the map of your empire, O great Khan, there must be room for both the big, stone fedora and the little fedoras in glass globes, not because they are all equally real, but because they are only assumptions. The one contains what is accepted as necessary, when it is not yet so. The others, what is imagined as possible and, a moment later, is possible no longer. Cities and Signs, 3. The man who is traveling does not yet know the city awaiting him along his route wonders what the palace will be like, the barracks, the mill, the theater, the bazaar. In every city of the empire, every building is different and set in a different order. But as soon as the stranger arrives at the unknown city and his eye penetrates the pine cone of pagodas and garrets and haymows, following the scrawl of canals, gardens, rubbish heaps, he immediately distinguishes which are the prince's palaces, the high priest's temples, the tavern, the prison, the slum. This, some say, confirms the hypothesis that each man bears in his mind a city made only of differences, a city without figures and without form, and the individual cities fill it up. This is not true of Zoe. In every point of this city you can, in turn, sleep, make tools, cook, accumulate gold, disrobe, reign, sell, question oracles. Any one of its pyramid roofs could cover the leprosarium or the odalisque's baths. The traveler roams all around and has nothing but doubts. He is unable to distinguish the features of the city. The features he keeps distinct in his mind also mingle. He infers this, if existence, in all its moments, is all of itself. Zoe is the place of indivisible existence. But why, then, does the city exist? What line separates the inside from the outside, the rumble of wheels from the howl of wolves? Thin Cities 2. Now I shall tell of the city of Zenobia, which is wonderful in this fashion. Though set on dry terrain, it stands on high pilings, and the houses are of bamboo and zinc, with many platforms and balconies placed on stilts at various heights, crossing one another, linked by ladders and hanging sidewalks, surmounted by cone-roofed belvederes, barrels storing water, weather vanes, jutting pulleys, and fish poles and cranes. No one remembers what need or command or desire drove Zenobia's founders to give their city this form, and so there's no telling whether it was satisfied by the city as we see it today, which has perhaps grown through successive superimpositions from the first, now undecipherable plan. But what is certain is that if you ask an inhabitant of Zenobia to describe his vision of a happy life, it is always a city like Zenobia that he imagines, with its pilings and its suspended stairways. A Zenobia perhaps quite different, a flutter with banners and ribbons, but always derived by combining elements of that first model. This said, it is pointless trying to decide whether Zenobia is to be classified among happy cities or among the unhappy. It makes no sense to divide cities into these two species, but rather into another two, those that through the years and the changes continue to give their form to desires, and those in which desires either erase the city or are erased by it. Trading Cities 1. Proceeding 80 miles into the northwest wind, you reach the city of Euphemia, where the merchants of 7 nations gather at every solstice and equinox. The boat that lands there with a cargo of ginger and cotton will set sail again, its hold filled with pistachio nuts and poppy seeds, and the caravan that has just unloaded sacks of nutmegs and raisins is already cramming its saddlebags with bolts of golden muslin for the return journey. But what drives men to travel up rivers and cross deserts to come here is not only the exchange of wares, which you can find everywhere the same, in all the bazaars inside and outside the great Khan's empire, scattered at your feet on the same yellow mats, in the shade of the same awnings protecting them from the flies, offered with the same lying reduction in prices. You do not come to Euphemia only to buy and sell, but also because at night, by the fires all around the market, seated on sacks or barrels or stretched out on piles of carpets, at each word that one man says, such as wolf, sister, hidden treasure, battle, scabies, lovers, the others tell, each one his tale of wolves, sisters, treasures, scabies, lovers, battles, and you know that in the long journey ahead of you, when, to keep awake against the camels swaying or the junks rocking, you start summoning up your memories one by one. Your wolf will have become another wolf, your sister a different sister, your battle other battles, on your return from Euphemia, the city where memory is traded at every solstice and at every equinox. Newly arrived and quite ignorant of the languages of the Levant, Marco Polo could express himself only by drawing objects from his baggage, drums, saltfish, necklaces of warthog's teeth, and pointing to them with gestures, leaps, cries of wonder or of horror, imitating the bay of the jackal, the hoot of the howl. The connections between one element of the story and another were not always obvious to the emperor. The objects could have various meanings. A quiver filled with arrows could indicate the approach of war, or an abundance of game. Or else, an armorer's shop, an hourglass could mean time passing, or time past, or sand, or a place where hourglasses are made. But what enhanced for Kublai every event or piece of news reported by his inarticulate informer was the space that remained around it, a void not filled with words. The descriptions of cities Marco Polo visited had this virtue. You could wander through them in thought, become lost, stop and enjoy the cool air, or run off. As time went by, words began to replace objects and gestures in Marco's tales. First exclamations, isolated nouns, dry verbs, then phrases, ramified and leafy discourses, metaphors and tropes. The foreigner had learned to speak the emperor's language, or the emperor to understand the language of the foreigner. But you would have said communication between them was less happy than in the past, to be sure. Words were more useful than objects and gestures in listing the most important things of every province and city: monuments, markets, costumes, fauna, and flora. And yet, when Polo began to talk about how life must be in those places, day after day, evening after evening, words failed him, and little by little, he went back to relying on gestures, grimaces, glances. So, for each city, after the fundamental information given in precise words, he followed with a mute commentary, holding up his hands, palms out, or backs, or sideways, in straight or oblique movements, spasmodic or slow. A new kind of dialogue was established. The great Khan's white hands, heavy with rings, answered with stately movements the sinewy, agile hands of a merchant. As an understanding grew between them, their hands began to assume fixed attitudes, each of which corresponded to a shift of mood, in their alternation and repetition, and as the vocabulary of things was renewed with new samples of merchandise, the repertory of mute comment tended to become closed, stable. The pleasure of falling back on it also diminished in both. In their conversations, most of the time, they remained silent and immobile. Chapter 3. The Kublai Khan had noticed that Marco Polo's cities resembled one another, as if the passage from one to another involved not a journey, but a change of elements. Now from each city Marco described to him, the great Khan's mind set out on its own, and after dismantling the city piece by piece, he reconstructed it in other ways, substituting components, shifting them, inverting them. Marco, meanwhile, continued reporting his journey, but the emperor was no longer listening. Kublai interrupted him. From now on, I shall describe the cities, and you will tell me if they exist and are as I have conceived them. I shall begin by asking you about a city of stairs, exposed by the Sirocco on a half-moon bay. Now I shall list some of the wonders it contains: a glass tank, high as a cathedral so people can follow the swimming and flying of the swallowfish and draw auguries from them; a palm tree which plays the harp with its fronds in the wind; a square with a horseshoe marble table around it, a marble tablecloth set with foods and beverages, also of marble. Sire, your mind has been wandering. This is precisely the city I was telling you about when you interrupted me. You know it? Where is it? What is its name? It has neither name nor place. I shall repeat the reason why I was describing it to you. From the number of imaginable cities we must exclude those whose elements are assembled without a connecting thread, an inner rule, a perspective, a discourse. With cities, it is as with dreams. Everything imaginable can be dreamed, but even the most unexpected dream is a rebus that conceals a desire or, its reverse, a fear. Cities, like dreams, are made of desires and fears. Even if the thread of their discourse is secret, their rules are absurd, their perspectives deceitful, and everything conceals something else. I have neither desires nor fears, the Khan declared, and my dreams are composed either by my mind or by chance. Cities also believe they are the work of the mind or of chance, but neither the one nor the other suffices to hold up their walls. You take delight not in a city's 7 or 70 wonders, but in the answer it gives to a question of yours, or the question it asks you, forcing you to answer, like Thebes, through the mouth of the Sphinx. Cities and Desire, 5. From there, after 6 days and 7 nights, you arrive in Zobaid, the white city, well exposed to the moon, with streets wound about themselves as in a skein. They tell this tale of its foundation. Men of various nations had an identical dream. They saw a woman running at night through an unknown city. She was seen from behind with long hair, and she was naked. They dreamed of pursuing her. As they twisted and turned, each of them lost her. After the dream, they set out in search of that city. They never found it, but they found one another. They decided to build a city like the one in the dream. In laying out the streets, each followed the course of his pursuit. At the spot where they had lost the fugitive's trail, they arranged spaces and walls differently from the dream, so she would be unable to escape again. This was the city of Zobaid, where they settled, waiting for that scene to be repeated one night. None of them, asleep or awake, ever saw the woman again. The city streets were streets where they went to work every day, with no link any more to the dreamed chase, which, for that matter, had long been forgotten. New men arrived from other lands, having had a dream like theirs, and in the city of Zobaid they recognized something of the streets of the dream, and they changed the positions of arcades and stairways to resemble more closely the path of the pursued woman, and so, at the spot where she had vanished, there would remain no avenue of escape. The first to arrive could not understand what drew these people to Zobaid, this ugly city, this trap. Cities and signs. 4. Of all the changes of language a traveler in distant lands must face, none equals that which awaits him in the city of Hypatia, because the change regards not words but things. I entered Hypatia one morning. A magnolia garden was reflected in blue lagoons. I walked among the hedges. Sure, I would discover young and beautiful ladies bathing, but at the bottom of the water, crabs were biting the eyes of the suicides, stones tied around their necks, their hair green with seaweed. I felt cheated, and I decided to demand justice of the Sultan. I climbed the porphyry steps of the palace with the highest domes. I crossed 6 tiled courtyards with fountains. The central hall was barred by iron gratings. Convicts with black chains on their feet were hauling up basalt blocks from a quarry that opened underground. I could only question the philosophers. I entered the great library. I became lost among shelves collapsing under the vellum bindings. I followed the alphabetical order of vanished alphabets, up and down halls, stairs, bridges. In the most remote papyrus cabinet, in a cloud of smoke, the dazed eyes of an adolescent appeared to me, as he lay on a mat, his lips glued to an opium pipe. What is the sage? The smoker pointed out of the window. It was a garden with children's games, 9 pins, a swing, a top. The philosopher was seated on the lawn. He said, "Signs form a language, but not the one you think you know." I realized I had to free myself from the images which in the past had announced to me the things I sought. Only then would I succeed in understanding the language of Hypatia. Now I have only to hear the neighing of horses and the cracking of whips, and I am seized with amorous trepidation. In Hypatia, you have to go to the stables and riding rings to see the beautiful women who mount the saddle, thighs naked, greaves on their calves, and as soon as a young foreigner approaches, they fling him on the piles of hay or sawdust and press their firm nipples against him. And when my spirit wants no stimulus or nourishment save music, I know it is to be sought in the cemeteries. The musicians hide in the tombs. From grave to grave, flute trills. Harp chords answer one another. True, also in Hypatia, the day will come when my only desire will be to leave. I know I must not go down to the harbor then, but climb the citadel's highest pinnacle and wait for a ship to go by up there. But will it ever go by? There is no language without deceit. Thin Cities 3. Whether Amila is like this because it is unfinished or because it has been demolished, whether the cause is some enchantment or only a whim, I do not know. The fact remains that it has no walls, no ceilings, no floors. It has nothing that makes it seem a city, except the water pipes that rise vertically where the houses should be and spread out horizontally where the floors should be. A forest of pipes that end in taps, showers, spouts, overflows. Against the sky, a lavabo's white stands out, or a bathtub, or some other porcelain, like late fruit still hanging from the boughs. You would think the plumbers had finished their job and gone away before the bricklayers arrived, or else their hydraulic systems, indestructible, had survived a catastrophe, an earthquake, or the corrosion of termites. Abandoned before or after it was inhabited, Armila cannot be called deserted. At any hour, raising your eyes among the pipes, you are likely to glimpse a young woman, or many young women, slender, not tall of stature, luxuriating in the bathtubs, or arching their backs under the showers suspended in the void, washing or drying or perfuming themselves, or combing their long hair at a mirror. In the sun, the threads of water fanning from the showers glisten, the jets of the taps, the spurts, the splashes, the sponges' suds. I have come to this explanation. The streams of water channeled in the pipes of Armila have remained in the possession of nymphs and naiads. Accustomed to traveling along underground veins, they found it easy to enter into the new aquatic realm, to burst from multiple fountains, to find new mirrors, new games, new ways of enjoying the water. Their invasion may have driven out the human beings, or Armila may have been built by humans as a votive offering to win the favor of the nymphs, offended at the misuse of the waters. In any case, now they seem content, these maidens. In the morning, you hear them singing. Trading Cities 2. In Chloe, a great city, the people who move through the streets are all strangers. At each encounter, they imagine 1,000 things about one another, meetings which could take place between them, conversations, surprises, caresses, bites. But no one greets anyone. Eyes lock for a second, then dart away, seeking other eyes, never stopping. A girl comes along, twirling a parasol on her shoulder, and twirling slightly also her rounded hips. A woman in black comes along, showing her full age, her eyes restless beneath her veil, her lips trembling. A tattooed giant comes along, a young man with white hair, a female dwarf, 2 girls, twins, dressed in coral. Something runs among them, an exchange of glances like lines that connect one figure with another and draw arrows, stars, triangles, until all combinations are used up in a moment, and other characters come onto the scene: a blind man with a cheetah on a leash, a courtesan with an ostrich plume fan, and a phoebe, a fat woman. And thus, when some people happen to find themselves together, taking shelter from the rain under an arcade, or crowding beneath an awning of the bazaar, or stopping to listen to the band in the square, meetings, seductions, copulations, orgies are consummated among them, without a word exchanged, without a finger touching anything, almost without an eye raised. A voluptuous vibration constantly stirs Chloe, the most chaste of cities. If men and women began to live their ephemeral dreams, every phantom would become a person with whom to begin a story of pursuits, pretenses, misunderstandings, clashes, oppressions, and the carousel of fantasies would stop. Cities and Eyes 1. The ancients built Valdrada on the shores of a lake, with houses, all verandas, one above the other, and high streets whose railed parapets look out over the water. Thus the traveler, arriving, sees two cities, one erect above the lake, and the other reflected, upside down. Nothing exists or happens in the one Valdrada that the other Valdrada does not repeat, because the city was so constructed that its every point would be reflected in its mirror, and the Valdrada down in the water contains not only all the flutings and juttings of the facades that rise above the lake, but also the room's interiors with ceilings and floors, the perspective of the halls, the mirrors of the wardrobes. Valdrada's inhabitants know that each of their actions is, at once, that action and its mirror image, which possesses the special dignity of images, and this awareness prevents them from succumbing for a single moment to chance and forgetfulness, even when lovers twist their naked bodies, skin against skin, seeking the position that will give one the most pleasure in the other, even when murderers plunge the knife into the black veins of the neck and more clotted blood pours out the more they press the blade that slips between the tendons. It is not so much their copulating or murdering that matters as the copulating or murdering of the images, limpid and cold, in the mirror. At times the mirror increases a thing's value, at times denies it. Not everything that seems valuable above the mirror maintains its force when mirrored. The twin cities are not equal, because nothing that exists or happens in Valdrada is symmetrical. Every face and gesture is answered from the mirror by a face and gesture inverted, point by point. The two Valdradas live for each other, their eyes interlocked, but there is no love between them. The great Khan has dreamed of a city. He describes it to Marco Polo. The harbor faces north, in shadow. The docks are high over the black water, which slams against the retaining walls. Stone steps descend, made slippery by seaweed. Boats smeared with tar are tied up, waiting for the departing passengers lingering on the quay to bid their families farewell. The farewells take place in silence, but with tears. It is cold. All wear shawls over their heads. A shout from the boatman puts a stop to the delays. The traveler huddles at the prow, moves off looking toward the group of those remaining behind. From the shore his features can no longer be discerned. The boat draws up beside a vessel riding at anchor. On the ladder a diminished form climbs up, vanishes. The rusted chain is heard being raised, scraping against the hawse pipe. The people remaining behind look over the ramparts above the rocks of the pier, their eyes following the ship until it rounds the cape. For the last time, they wave a white rag. Set out, explore every coast, and seek this city, the Khan says to Marco. Then come back and tell me if my dream corresponds to reality. Forgive me, my lord. There is no doubt that sooner or later I shall set sail from that dock, Marco says. But I shall not come back to tell you about it. The city exists, and it has a simple secret. It knows only departures, not returns.